To do what we want to do today, we're going to talk about experience working at the intersection of conservation and anti-corruption. We're also going to call you to action. And one of the things we're going to do today is tell you about a new network that we're helping to support of practitioners working in this space so that we can learn from each other. So one of the ways we can do that to get started is I would love for us to tell each other a little bit about who we are, and I'm going to do this in a very streamlined way. And that is, if you consider yourself part of the anti-corruption community, would you please stand up? Look around and see who's here. Yeah. Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. We're at the International Anti-Corruption Conference. Okay, thank you. You can sit down. If you consider yourself part of the conservation community, would you please stand up? Look at this. I'm actually so pleased to see what I see. We have a number of people from the World Wildlife Fund around the world who are here today. I want to we'll be hearing from a few in this panel, but I also want to point out some people you won't be hearing from today. Oh gosh, this might take a long time. Jose, Preston, Renata, Jeanette Hemley, Linda Kunje, Lee Henry. V is up in the front here. We'll be hearing from him in some other panels. These are really important people that I hope you will get a chance to meet during this conference, because these are people who are actually breaking ground in the conservation world, and the others of you who stood up that I don't know yet, and I hope I will soon. And so they need partners. You might need partners in the work that you're doing too. So I hope that this will be an opportunity for people to get to know each other a little bit. Okay, is there anything else I need to do before we get started? I think we'll preview this practitioners forum that we're going to be supporting. You'll hear about that at the end of this session. I'll note now that we're going to have a side meeting on that on Thursday at lunchtime. We don't have a room yet, but we will continue to look for one. If you have the little card that was on the seats, there's a QR code that will lead you to more information as we have it, and also to sign up. And I'm going to say that now, and we're going to repeat it at the end. Okay, I am going to sit down now and start a discussion with some of these people up here, and I'm going to introduce them as I address them so that we don't have to do a long list of introductions at the beginning. And here's where the people in the back may wish that they were sitting further up, because we're going to be sitting down. So please come up if you feel like you can't see or can't participate in the process. Okay. Now I have to turn my pages and look at my notes. So, the first part of this discussion, what we're going to try to talk about is why anti-corruption and conservation. And if you're in the room, maybe you already have a good sense of this. But we really want to hear from a number of people from their own experience. So I'm going to start by asking Brice Böhmer on my right here, who is the Climate and Environment Lead for Transparency International at the Secretariat. To just tell us, Brice, a little bit, transparency is now focusing on corruption that drives biodiversity loss and climate change, and we saw this as a theme for this conference. To give us a sense of the scale of the issue here, tell us briefly what TI means when it talks about corruption in the climate space, and maybe an example of the impact that you're trying to highlight and work on here. And I think I need to pass the mic to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And yeah, very happy to be here with you. And thank you so much for joining us. And I must say, it's when I joined Transparency International 10 years ago, when we just started looking at those issues, this would be a bit my dream to have this conversation one day and to actually also have some concrete objectives to join these two communities. So very much looking forward to today and to the next steps of that. So as I was just saying, Transparency International as an organization, and as, I stood up for the first, to your first question, I wanted to also stand up for the second one, because I feel I also belong to the second community. But we as an anti-corruption organization, were not looking at issues of environment and climate because we were feeling this is for the second community, the environmentalists, the climate change people. And 10 years ago, we were thinking, okay, it might still be worth kind of trying to understand a bit what's going on. So it's 10 years ago. It was maybe, I mean, I was thinking until now that it was maybe a bit late. At the same time, it was maybe actually a bit early in a way for a governance or anti-corruption organization to look at those issues. So we started, as we do at TIs, doing kind of some research and trying to understand what are actually the issues, if there are any issues. So this was 10 years ago, and then we realized actually the scope, the impact of that is something that only gives us one option. The option is to tackle those issues and look at more in detail at those kind of linkages between corruption and climate. We had and we still have to some extent quite a climate focus, but of course this is clearly linked with the biodiversity agenda and the other environmental, like, larger topics. So so when we started looking at that, and I mean now we have a bit of kind of experience of doing research at the global level, but also in many countries. You will hear also from some country examples later. And for kind of a different set of reasons, we realized that especially when it comes to trying to tackle the climate challenge, so to speak, there are a combination of factors that make those objectives at risk of corruption and very high risks. You know, it's a very complex, I mean, it's complex issues. It's the scale of the challenge is huge. The potential financial arrangements around that are also quite large. The infrastructures are also relatively new and tested. There are sectors that are also very high, that have very high level of corruptions. The money or the efforts also need to come from all over the world, and but also from specific kind of basins, so to speak, of forests, for example, where there are endemic levels of corruption. So all of those and others made us decide, okay, we need to also take our responsibility as a governance anti-corruption organization to continue looking at these issues. And I mean, when it comes to examples, there are many, and all around the world. We are actually currently building some kind of database that we call the Climate Corruption Atlas that is on the website and that we want to expand. At the moment, there are kind of around 50 cases. Hopefully at the end of next year, at least 100, and this is only, you know, the tip of the iceberg. This is only what we know, but you all know that corruption by definition happens behind closed doors. So we understand corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. I guess most of the room knows that already. But just to say that usually, and also when it comes to environmental corruption, we think of kind of a monetary exchange, whereas I think most of the most impactful corruption issues doesn't necessarily require a money exchange. So we saw, for example, in Bangladesh that a flood shelter was supposed to be built. Of course, next to the community, it's supposed to protect in case of a flood, but it was built in the backyard of the local politician, which was on the other side of the river of the community, which makes that basically this shelter is useless. So it's money that has been used, that has been lost. It's maladaptation, but it's also killing people for the next flood, no? So I think that's, when it comes to the scale, that's what I wanted to say, that it's also much beyond the environmental issues, and also this is one of the reasons why we wanted to look at those issues. And of course, you also know as we speak that there are, you know, 2 or 3 environmental defenders or whistleblowers being killed each week. So this is also due to corruption, due to the levels of impunity that are very, very high in that sector. And If you look, and that's my last point, if you look at the climate negotiations, I'm just back from the COP. I don't know if other in the rooms were there. Well, I know at least 2 other people were there from the Green Climate Fund, and so I'm just trying to recover from the COP. And there, I think it's a good example of also where we are in terms of the undue influence that we have seen for many years of some of the most polluting industries. And there has been some recognition of that, and I think now it's clear that it's not acceptable anymore, but it's clear that we have to act upon it, and this is why we are asking for some kind of conflict of interest policy to be in place and able to manage that at climate negotiations, for example.
Thanks so much, Brice, for setting some of the context here. So we're talking about climate. We're talking about very high-level policy issues. We're also talking about very, very concrete, real implications for individuals and people on the ground. I'm going to turn now to Jennifer Lewis, who is the Deputy Director of the USAID Anti-Corruption Task Force. This is a terrific new development to have an anti-corruption task force at USAID. Jen, USAID is really leading this charge, and the project that I'm part of and that many of the people here are part of is probably the leading in the sense of first example of the effort for USAID to really integrate anti-corruption perspectives across its work. We know this is part of a priority from the Biden administration. But tell us a little bit from a development perspective why USAID has prioritized this set of issues now.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, it's quite loud. Sorry about that. So first of all, I just want to echo at the very beginning our thanks to the project for hosting this session, and also just indicate that the last IACC I was at in person, I traveled with a colleague from our USAID Environment Office who managed this project at the time, and she commented to me, first of all, that it was amazing that there were not more folks from this sector, from the environment and NRM sector, but second, that she thought she'd been to the most depressing conferences in the world when she went to biodiversity conferences, but she only now realized how much more depressing it could get being at an international anti-corruption conference. So. But thanks so much for mentioning our leadership in this space. I mean, I think this project is at the vanguard, but USAID in reality for decades has been looking at ways to integrate broader democracy, governance, human rights considerations across our work. And we have a lot of stellar examples at the country level in countries like Uganda and the Philippines, where there has been some important work done on trying to look at issues of corruption, transparency, accountability across sectors. And these are really important, and they're where we stand. But the reality is that many of these sectoral programs have often treated corruption as sort of a democratic hurdle to be overcome, or a contextual challenge to be perhaps understood or acknowledged, but not squarely addressed. And so our staff across these sectors and our missions and our implementers, whether it's on humanitarian assistance or infrastructure or sanitation or water or climate change, have acknowledged that corruption is a problem, but most have not recognized it as their problem. And so I think one of the issues that we have really tried to take on as a task force comes from this understanding that corruption impedes the achievement of all of our development objectives across all sectors. It is not just a contextual challenge. It actually is something that is working at odds with the objectives that we seek in each sector. It's undermining our investments as a donor, and it's undermining the objectives of all the countries in which we work, all their national action plans across every sector. Corruption is, as our administrator has said, development in reverse. And so the hook that really has allowed us to take this viral, so to speak, in the past year and a half is that the US strategy on countering corruption, which is just hitting its anniversary this week, centers countering corruption across sectors as part of one of the main approaches that the entire whole of government, the entire US government will undertake in order to counter corruption. And this is important because we recognize the pervasive and corrosive impacts of corruption across all sectors, but also because we simply cannot achieve the ambition that we want on tackling transnational grand corruption, kleptocracy, and the movement of money around the world if we don't tackle it through sectors, right? And that's because we all know that corrupt actors have multiple points of entry through which they can abuse public resources for personal and political gain. It's not just an amorphous idea of money moving here and there. It happens in water, and it happens in climate, and it happens in health service delivery. That is where public resources are diverted and misused and abused, and that is where power is wielded in order to corruptly influence otherwise democratic processes. And these actors are savvy and networked in a way that, frankly, we are not. I mean, the fact that we're remarking on the fact that these two communities are coming together indicates the way we have been traditionally siloed in the development space, whereas corruption actors don't see those, silos, they see opportunities. They're willing and able to corrupt anyone in any sector, and in fact, the more the merrier, right? So in order to really uproot corruption, what we need is broader partnership and broader networks that don't stop at the edges of a sectoral program. It'll never be sufficient to simply create an online procurement system and call it a day. It will never be sufficient to simply strengthen a supreme audit institution or do any of the interventions we've always done in the anti-corruption space. We need all of our sectoral colleagues to take this issue on and this problem set on as their own. And so that's really what's driving our leadership in this space. It's why we issued our new guide to countering corruption across sectors, which is intended as a way of thinking through these windows of opportunity. And really, I mentioned this last week, but giving permission, frankly, to stakeholders in all sectors to see corruption as part of their issue, as something that they need to understand and own. That it's not just a democracy problem, it's an all of society problem. And so we need all hands on deck, we need all sectors to really be playing in this space. And so that's really the why from the development perspective. And we've had a lot of support, obviously, from our administrator, who sees this as so central to our mission as an agency. And now the next step is making sure that our staff around the world and our implementing partners have the tools and resources to really meet that charge.
Thank you so much, Jen. That's another great scene setter for what we're going to talk about more. And as you talked about the willingness of corruptors to corrupt anyone, anywhere, I saw Tari Rachman, the deputy coordinator for Indonesia Corruption Watch, nodding her head very, very vigorously. So bringing this to the national context, Tari, Indonesia Corruption Watch is a leading anti-corruption organization in Indonesia. I don't need to tell you that, but just so everyone in the room knows. And now you're working on a major project related to deforestation and corruption and forest management. I think in this room, maybe we're already convinced that environmental impact is not a small issue for an anti-corruption organization, but certainly you have priorities to address the broader politics in your country as well. So why did a leading anti-corruption organization decide to take on the environment issues as well? And I have to walk over and give you this microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I want to share the context of Indonesia. If you know that the lands area in Indonesia, it's around 190 million hectares, and 70% of them is forest. So if we talk about the corruption in forestry, then we talk about all the living, anything that life in the area. So the corruption in forestry is not about talking about the state losses that happen in Indonesia, and about the state revenue that cannot be collected by the government, or maybe how many permit or the concession that the government give to the enterprise, to the company. But I think it's more than that. When we talk about the corruptions in forestry in Indonesia context, it also talks about how then the damage of the environment, and also it's really related to how the conflict of interest that happen in the process. So from the several corruption cases that happen in Indonesia that we monitor, we usually see that there is very a connection between the public official and the private sector. there are sometimes also the law enforcement agencies, such as the police or the military, they also back up this process or this situation, because they usually become a security or anything that preserve the process. And I think in the broader context in Indonesia, it also very related to the political context, because we know in Indonesia, the political cost is very expensive. So I can say that a person, when they want to be maybe a region or maybe a mayor in a small area, they need to pay around 1.2 million USD until 6.3 million. Is it in a small area, but in a national, is it higher? And then the question is where they got the money. Usually they don't have that money, and then they ask from the company, and the company usually related to the company that works in forestry sector. And this company, we can say that they not give the money for free. They ask for something after the person is elected. For example, the project, the concession. So this is the things that happen every year when we face the election process. It's like the vicious circle, we think, because it's repeatedly, and there is nothing that we can do to cut this process, because the political cost is very high. So I don't want to say that the government not doing anything for this. They do some policies. For example, they increase the number of the fund for the political assistance. So this is to make the political party have lower cost for the political event. But I think it's not enough, because that still happen in Indonesia. And the other regulation that maybe the government also raised is about to withdraw the authority to give the concession from the local government to the national government. But what we think that they still have the network, even from the local until the national level. So I think it's a big challenge how to tackle this, and I think we cannot address it from one perspective or two perspectives. It's more holistic that we can address. I think we can overcome this situation, and that's why I think when we talk about the forestry, we cannot just talk about the corruption, but we need another perspective, another organization, another stakeholders that also involved in combating corruption in forestry. I think that's for me.
Thank you so much. So we've heard about climate, we've heard about giant impacts on small numbers of people when flood protection gets put somewhere it shouldn't be. We've heard about deforestation. Now we're going to talk about the illegal wildlife trade. And Gabriel Sipos is with us. He's the anti-corruption advisor at Traffic, the wildlife monitoring organization. So from the conservation side, and I know, Gabriel, you have a foot very strongly in both worlds as well, but Traffic's mission is to ensure that the trade in wild plants and animals is not a threat to conservation outcomes. And you're in Traffic monitors illegal wildlife trade. So Traffic is now a partner in the Targeting Natural Resource Corruption Project. What makes corruption a critical issue for Traffic?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're seeing the slide behind me that's showing the global illegal trade in several species. I think it's quite easy to see, how cross-border and how global that trade is. Perhaps just a reminder from the beginning of the session until about now, roughly on average, 2 elephants have been killed through poaching, and that number is going to be around 100 at the end of the day. And that's just single species. That's just one day. So there's quite a bit of illegal trade, unfortunately, and Traffic, the organization I work for, has realized that corruption is a huge enabler. It's not just that we don't care, we don't know about the animals. It's corruption, it's the organized crime related to it that's really driving the trade, and I think the slide behind me shows that. The next slide will give you the number. It's over 20 billion $20 billion US dollars per year, the estimate of how big this trade is. This may perhaps not sound much, but it's the fourth largest illegal trade, right behind the arms, human trafficking, and drugs, of course. So it's really big, and it's reaching pretty much every country in the world. Next slide, please. Moreover, and you could probably tell from the first slide as well, is that huge challenges of illegal wildlife trade are happening actually often in countries with huge corruption challenges, which makes it much more difficult actually, because on the policy level, pretty much illegal trade is banned and regulated, so we have the policies in place, but you need really law enforcement to enforce it, to punish the people who are often caught. But that's not happening because the law enforcement is also a target for the corrupt actors. And if you have a weak rule of law, then it's really hard to enforce all these bans, all these regulations. So Traffic has been active in fighting illegal trade for almost 50 years, and we have really focused on trying to get the laws in place, trying to get awareness all across the countries, trying to train law enforcement to actually recognize the species and try to make sure that the people responsible go to jail. But we often found that corruption would undermine these efforts, that you can make people aware, you can give them the tools, but yeah, the corruption would often just undermine much of your effort. And that's the reason why we're trying to engage more with anti-corruption organizations. I have worked for Transparency International for over 10 years, and I just joined Traffic recently. It's the first time that Traffic, such a long-established conservation organization, has had a position that's exclusively focused on corruption. And finally, my last slide will just give you the taste of what we're doing on corruption. So we're trying to get involved with transparency, with open data, try to see what data can tell us about the illegal flows and about the responsibility of law enforcement. Is it showing us patterns, and is it giving us the idea where actually more work needs to be done? We also engaged in trying to look at the court performance, trying to see that they're accountable enough, because that's also one of the targets of the corrupt people, try to pay off justices so that the trial doesn't end up in people being accused. And of course, we do a lot of training of law enforcement, partly because they often don't have the capacity. Illegal wildlife trade for them is not often a priority, but also we found that talking about corruption needs to be part of that. It's not enough to give them the tools and try to support them in other ways if we don't talk about the corruption risk, if we don't emphasize that you'll be the guys that the corrupt people will try to actually bribe and talk you out of your duties. Yes, I think that's my last slide. So yeah, I'm as Liz emphasized, I work for Transparency International a lot, and I feel that we at the conservation side now would benefit a lot from getting engaged with you, with sharing what we know about how corruption affects, say, illegal wildlife trade, but also getting all the know-how, all the knowledge that the anti-corruption organizations have in how to tackle the corruption, at the ministry level, at the wildlife agency level, at the customs, and so on. So I'm really looking forward to discussing how to work together better.
Thanks so much, Gabriel, and thanks for listing the kinds of things that traffic is involved in, because those of you who are anti-corruption experts in the room should recognize a lot of those and recognize that you have partners who can help and support and who need your help and support on the conservation side, and really addressing these issues with the science, with the data gathering, the other aspects of the discussion around these two intersecting areas. So again, one of the real purposes of this is to help forge not only that understanding, but actually that you'll talk to each other during this week as well. So now I want to transition a little bit to Simon, who is sitting next to me, who is the Chief of Party of the Anti-Corruption and Combating Wildlife Trafficking Project at WWF in Madagascar. And you'll notice I didn't say Simon's last name because people like me should not try to pronounce Malagasy last names. So I will let Simon introduce himself by his last name if he wishes. But Simon, you now lead a project in WWF in Madagascar that seeks to reduce opportunities for corruption in anti-wildlife trafficking functions. So I'd like to transition a little bit to the next phase of our discussion as well, and hear from you, sitting in a conservation organization, how it looks to be trying to reduce the impact of corruption on environmental outcomes, especially in light, for instance, of the very reality of the summoning of the Transparency International executive director after she spoke out on corruption in Madagascar. How is it that now, working as part of the solutions, not just the problems, but how does it feel for a conservation organization, and what are some of the experiences you'd like to share on that point?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Simon Rafanomezantsoa, that is my name, and I work for WWF in Madagascar, based in Antananarivo, Madagascar. Just a little bit of story about the case of the executive director for Transparency International in Madagascar. Several weeks ago, Transparency International was asking the court in Madagascar to conduct some investigations in relation to the lychee business in Madagascar because of possible money laundering and vast corruption in the business. And instead of doing the investigation, the police summoned them, and that was the story. And I'm happy she's here. And after the workshop, if you like to talk to her about the story, don't hesitate. Coming to your question. Yes, I work for a conservation NGO in Madagascar, and it is the first time that I'm working on corruption in relation to combating wildlife trafficking in my country. It's not easy. It's the first time, as I said, we partnering with USAID mission in Madagascar, we partnering with Traffic International, Transparency International, and a coalition of civil society organizations in my country. The project aims to reduce corruption and improve conservation achievements and impact. It's not easy, as I said, because even in my organization, some colleagues are asking me, why are you working with this sensitive topic and something like that. Yeah, but fortunately, we have experts in my consortium. I'm talking about Transparency International and traffic. We, in terms of, I would say, approach, we try to promote and implement a kind of holistic approach in terms of addressing the whole, I would say, supply chains. We working actually on wildlife supply chains. The case of tortoise. Tortoise is Madagascar is the most trafficked species, and also on timber supply chain. You have heard the story about rosewood and ebonies and palisanders in Madagascar. Yeah, very sensitive topics. We also, as a holistic approach, we also working with multiple stakeholders, the government, several ministries, including the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Justice, security forces, and of course the anti-corruption system agencies in Madagascar. The institutions are there for the fighting against corruption, and we have a national anti-corruption strategy in Madagascar. But the problem is we don't see on the ground results. That's a challenge. Yeah, that's it. Main challenge. It's not easy to work with government because they have their own agenda. Some of them are reluctant to work with us. We trying to coordinate their intervention, and they don't have means, lack of resources. That's some of the challenges we are facing in the project. And also coming to legislation, we trying to put in place, for example, some mechanism to denounce corruption in the field of conservation, but there is no law to protect whistleblowers in Madagascar. And the civil society organizations have been working on a proposed law for that yet, but it's not easy because there is a long process to get the law adopted and implemented in my country. But we see also opportunities because there is a strong will to address the issue at the level of government, but also at the level of stakeholders, I mean civil society and community-based organizations. Yeah, and we have already achieved, my project, just for your information, started last year, and we have already achieved some result. I can give you an example. We have done a kind of corruption risk diagnostics within the supply chain that I just mentioned. So we know where is corruption, how is it working, who are involved, and so on. So the result of diagnostics will help us to tailor or to design some anti-corruption measures with the stakeholders in Madagascar. So I will stop there, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to respond to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will have a chance for some discussion, but I'm going to move now to a second kind of round of questions for some of the people who have joined us here. To talk a little bit about what this actually looks like in terms of the activities that are going on. Simon just mentioned the diagnostics. That has turned out to be an extremely important aspect of bringing anti-corruption efforts into conservation work. For organizations that are not so accustomed to analyzing the dynamics of corruption and the politics related to it, sometimes really kind of mapping this out is an important first step. And thinking and then sharing the experience from anti-corruption activists, organizations, experts about how you then navigate those processes to start to do the kinds of things that you're doing, Simon, and others as well, to change policy, change action, change the political dynamics when you can. So just wanted to highlight that. But then moving now to some other issues that also are part of the anti-corruption remit in the conservation space. I'm going to come back to Gabriel. And Traffic has done some really interesting work on engaging financial institutions to target the proceeds of illegal wildlife trade. And we know that that's a main connection for corruption as well, is the laundering of funds. The language of anti-money laundering and politically exposed persons is not necessarily the language of conservation organizations or IWT workers. How did traffic land on this? And can you share perhaps one critical point for this anti-corruption audience that would help them see the problem of money laundering through a wildlife lens?
I showed you the global map at the beginning, and of course it's quite clear that this trade, this illegal wildlife trade being so global, it's also quite clear that there's a lot of money laundering involved, because a lot of these actors want to actually use that money that they gain illegally, and often they want to use it in different countries. So they're using global financial institutions often, how to get to the nice houses and yachts and all the other stuff that they usually buy. And so we realize how critical it is to engage private sector as well. So we are engaging, of course, airlines and airports and all these points of entry, points of along the supply chain where the illegal trade is going on. But money laundering is really important as well. And for the other reasons, connected to terrorism and other types of illegal trade, financial institutions have been pressured, incentivized to actually engage. And we felt that letting them know more about the illegal trade, about the patterns of it, would be very beneficial. So that's one of the ways we approach them. We try to show them, how illegal wildlife trade happens and where, they might be vulnerable actually to unwillingly being part of it. And this project that you asked about, Liz, so we thought, okay, so one way that the illegal wildlife trade happens is that political elites or public officials are actually a part of it, because as I said, there's a lot of regulation, but if the public officials, they have the power actually to give out the permits, to let the illegal trade go unnoticed. So what we did, and this was specifically, we did it in Latin America, we looked at the timber industry and tried to see what the connection is between public officials and the timber concessions. I think Tari also mentioned that in Indonesia, of course, that happens anywhere. And then we used the big data approach, something that we haven't used much before, but I'm seeing that a lot in anti-corruption organizations, using big data to see what's going on if the data reveals some illegal patterns. So the same thing is happening here. And when we compare the public officials and their friends and their families and how they relate actually to timber concessions, we saw, of course, several types of corruption risks. As you well know, data will not tell you that this is really corruption. But if you see, one public official's family, especially from the forestry, department, would get a lot of concessions, that's a clear corruption risk, and it's very likely there's something fishy involved. So what we did actually with this, or the idea of this project is to try to get these patterns, these revelations to the finance industry, to make them know that this is the way that this particular pattern may show up, and they should maybe take extra care in the way they actually process the payments or the way they look at the certain companies. So yeah, again, like connecting the open data approach and the engagement of private industry, I think is one of the ways that we thought this would be a great way to engage both the new technologies, new data, and the industry that's always been there, that's had its up and downs, and that could actually do much to stem the illegal wildlife trade. And my final word is we will talk about this a bit more tomorrow at the 5:30 session, 5:30 in the in the late afternoon, the traffic-led session, exactly where we'll discuss how to counter money laundering and how to engage both private sector and the public institutions in the cooperation like this. So you're all very much welcome.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for that. And yes, please do mark your calendars for another conversation soon. And there are a number of others actually as well from different members of the TNRC consortium and partners. So we hope you'll join those. I'm now going to move to Shambhavi Poudel. She is the Campaigns and Education Officer for WWF in Nepal. So welcome to the Anti-Corruption Conference, another one of our WWF colleagues. You're supporting WWF Nepal's work to improve transparency and accountability at the community level with community forest user groups. And especially you're leading a new effort to bring young people's voices more effectively into community resource management processes. Tell us, has WWF encountered any particular challenges as it's raised the issue of corruption in a community context? And if so, can you share one of those and maybe how you've addressed it? And how do you think this exciting new step of including youth voices will contribute to your goals?
Good morning, everyone. So WWF Nepal is a conservation organization, like we all know. But unfortunately, there's not one thing that we can do to ensure conservation. There are a lot of underlying reasons within the communities that contribute to deforestation, illegal wildlife trade, a lot of other reasons that do not help us achieve the conservation outcome. And anti-corruption is one of them. And we are working with the community forest user groups in Nepal, and we have over 22,000 community forests in Nepal. And WWF, being a conservation organization, we do not have the resources nor the expertise to support all the 22,000 community forest groups across the country. And that is one of our biggest challenges. We have 30 years of experience working in conservation, but we do not have that much experience when it comes to anti-corruption. And when it comes to partnerships, we are always working with the same group of people, the same organizations, the same staffs, and every time I walk into a room, it's always the same people. And it's either at the policy level with government agencies, ministries, or it's some grassroots level with local NGOs, but we don't have cross-sectoral partnerships in place. We do not have partnerships with any kind of anti-corruption agencies which has the expertise and experience to support our anti-corruption work. So that has been one of the biggest challenges that we're currently facing at WWF Nepal. So when it comes to young people, we are engaging young people in our anti-corruption efforts. And why not? Because this room eventually will be replaced by this generation of young people. And no matter how hard we try, we'll not be able to solve all of the world problem in our lifespan. So at WWF Nepal, we believe young people are the present, so we engage them in all of our present interventions, and we prepare children for the future. So in my role, I ensure that young people are at the heart of conservation in everything that we do at WWF Nepal, including the anti-corruption work that we're doing. So why young people, and then how are we going to encounter this challenge? Because when we work with communities and young people in those communities, we do not expect all of them to become conservationists or work for WWF or anti-corruption, but these young people are going to take diverse professions. They are going to do different things in life. And that's why we want to work with different sectors of young people, because these young people will move into different directions, but they'll carry the value of conservation and anti-corruption in their hearts. And that's exactly what we're intending to do with our work with young people. So we hope that with our interventions in the communities that we are working, anti-corruption conservation becomes a shared agenda, and nobody has to raise hands separately when we talk about anti-corruption and conservation. So, thank you.
Beautiful. I love the message that young people are the present, not the future. That's really important. And we're going to move to somebody else who's doing work at this nexus in a country where, well, it matters in all countries, but it really matters in Brazil as well. Joachim Stassart is a researcher on the Socio-environmental integrity program at Transparency International in Brazil. And TI Brazil, I think, is one of the country offices that has really embraced an environmental agenda as part of its work. So you're another example of the kind of cross-sectoral work that we're celebrating and supporting here today. Can you describe what aspect of environmental issues TI Brazil is focusing on and who you're partnering with? And to help us understand the opportunities and challenges of working across this space, what key learning point would you share regarding collaboration with environmental organizations?
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to talk a bit about how we started to work on the environment as an anti-corruption organization to understand a bit those learning points. So I think we started to work on those issues 3 years ago, a bit more than 3 years ago. And there was this sense that corruption was a very important issue to tackle environmental issues and forest degradation and illegal mining, illegal logging, wildlife trafficking in Brazil. But when you talk to environmental NGO, they would say, yeah, bribery is an issue, undue influence is an issue, but they generally they wouldn't be able to really highlight what were the corruption risks related to those issues. So that was the first step of our work, really to develop a knowledge, because there was very little knowledge on this topic about what are the specific corruption risks in each critical sector that are vulnerable to environmental crime, such as logging industry, the mining sector, wildlife breeding. We've also worked on land grabbing, and to really understand what are those corruption risks and how corruption makes environmental crimes possible in Brazil. Because there are recent data that show that over 90% of deforestation is illegal, so illegality is really an important issue in Brazil. And so that was really the base of our action to build our awareness-raising activities, advocacy activities, and partnership afterwards. And that's our second step, was really to make a bridge between the environmental community and the anti-corruption community. So on the one side, we are part of environmental coalition with there's a very fantastic environmental community in Brazil that are doing an amazing work, and to try to bring our anti-corruption approach to bring some innovative solutions that they don't think about, because they're doing a fantastic job, but we try to bring those anti-corruption solutions to their work. And also we try to work with environmental agencies so that they can tackle the corruption risks that we have identified in our research, so that they can prevent them and reduce those risks. And we also work on the other side with anti-corruption institutions. So we partner with, for example, we have a partnership with an internal control body in Rondônia, which is a state that is particularly affected by environmental crimes, to conduct an audit on forest management. And this audit identified, I think, more than 80 corruption risks and issued over 50 recommendations for the public administration there. We're also working with courts of accounts to provide guidance so that they know what they can do to contribute to this agenda. We've also worked with the National Strategy Against Corruption and Money Laundering in Brazil, which is basically the forum that gathers all public institutions that are working on the corruption agenda, to establish for the first time a working group on environmental crimes, and to really consider this issue as a priority for anti-corruption institutions. And the third learning point I want to highlight is also that independent, transparent, strong, and participatory institution and governance is very, very, very important to really tackle environmental crimes and to reduce forest degradation and to enforce environmental regulations. And the outgoing government was a textbook case to understand what happens when this goes wrong. And there were, for example, we try to monitor and to report systematically those issues to raise awareness about that. And for example, we highlight how political interference was interfering in law enforcement investigations. Also, how this interference was also leading to harassment of civil servants that were conducting those investigations. We also noticed the political appointments of unqualified people to at the head of environmental agencies, the exclusion of civil society of different bodies of the environmental governance, and the list is very long. You can go on like this for a while. But really, all those issues about institutional integrity led to a collapse of the environmental governance and the inability to enforce environmental regulation and to really tackle environmental crimes.
Super. Yeah, a couple of really key points there. One about knowledge sharing and sort of building up the expertise of people who are incredible experts at forestry and biology and ecology and a number of other issues, but haven't spent a lot of time trying to navigate politics and to have this conversation in the same space where we're looking really at, it's not just the ecology, it's not just the hard science, but it's the social science and the soft science of understanding why things are happening the way they are, so that we can tackle both the symptoms at the environmental level, but also the disease at the public, the policy and politics level. I'm going to turn lastly to Jen to ask you a little bit about how USAID is now thinking about encouraging this kind of collaboration across these two spaces. Share some thoughts on what you'll be looking for in future programming, to the degree that you can say that generally, and how you're supporting also the transition within the agency to break down the silos that you mentioned.
Great, thanks. Well, so I think I'll start with how we're thinking about this at the agency and then maybe move to some of the programming considerations. But in terms of the agency, I think it's worth noting we're a highly decentralized agency. We work in 100 plus countries around the world. And so the kinds of changes we are asking our missions around the world to make on centering anti-corruption at the mission level are really profound. And so we are in the process of socializing this topic broadly across the agency. And part of it is about asking our missions to take a step back and think about it from a strategic sort of 30,000-foot view. What is the corruption environment in which we are operating in a particular country? What are the dynamics, the drivers, the actors, the networks that cross all sectors, right? And it's important because we can't continue to operate as if our investments in foreign assistance do not operate in an environment where corruption is real and rife in many cases. And so part of that is about understanding the dynamics in each sector, and part of it's about ensuring that our own assistance is not inadvertently perpetuating corruption dynamics and networks and systems of patronage and so on. And so that really is a very different way of thinking about our programming at the country level. We're also separately, in line with the US strategy, thinking about all the other actors in the US government that are working in this space and in each of these countries, and to the degree possible, the ways in which we can collaborate with them. And those are important when we talk about sectoral considerations as well. We are going to be asking our missions to look at forging new partnerships and working with diverse actors, and really in investing in understanding the corruption dynamics. And that goes to the programming space as well. Obviously, I can't say anything that's sort of procurement sensitive, but at an anti-corruption conference, that would be problematic. But in general terms, we know we're going to need to understand a lot more about the corruption dynamics in each particular sector. And some of what was just mentioned, that Simon mentioned, some of these corruption diagnostics, you mentioned in terms of really understanding and mapping it. We know that there are pockets of this work, and it's great that that is happening. We need to learn from that, and we need to do it at a greater scale, really mapping out the way corruption dynamics influence particular sectors, but the way they cross sectors as well. In many cases, it's the same actors. It's the same, right, politically connected actors who are tapping multiple wells of public resources. And so mapping out all of those actors and systems and dynamics is going to be really important. And we need better tools for measuring corruption. That's the reality. The tools we have are proxies, whether it's citizen perception study, surveys, et cetera, that give us little pieces of the elephant that's being poached, little pieces of what is happening on transnational corruption. But without certain kind of a global data set, it's really impossible to see how these dynamics are playing out, and the way in which the corruption that's taking place across sectors is taking advantage of loopholes in the global financial system and allowing actors to park their money right here in DC and in Miami and other places like this. So we're talking about new sectoral assessments. We're talking about taking the learning from learning and working politically and our political economy analysis work that USAID has led, but many other donors have as well. But it's also about connecting the dots, I think, between programs that are working, in this case, in conservation and biodiversity, the learning you have here, with programs that are also working in other sectors, education and health and so on, because there are many insights that can be shared. There are many common problem sets, right? Whether you're talking about the problem set or the nexus point being public procurement or in contracting or in licensing, right? There are so many commonalities that I feel like taking a step back and getting creative about ways to broaden the partnership base, not just anti-corruption and conservation, but beyond. And so the last thing I'll just mention is that we know we're going to have to do a lot more on learning and evidence, and that really is about measuring change over time. Like, how do we tell the broader story on how we are fighting corruption on biodiversity, right? How does working in biodiversity impact fighting corruption? How does fighting corruption impact biodiversity? That's just one example. We need better data and more indicators, and a way to measure progress, as our administrator says, progress beyond programs in this context.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. And so that's a mandate for all of us to start thinking about how we do this better and work better together. We've been in the room for about an hour. Some of you who were able to get through registration sooner have been in the room a lot longer than that. So I'm going to stand up for a minute and ask you if you're convinced that you want to have more conversations about this and do some more work about this. If you feel like that is something that's important, I'm going to hand now the word to Brice and to also our colleague Micol Martini from the World Wildlife International Secretariat to tell you about a new network that we're launching. And then we'd like to hear from you about how that could be useful for you and how we could design that to be as useful as possible. So to Brice first.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the purpose of this conversation was also, as I was pointing to in my initial comment, to say that we want today to use that session to launch the practitioners forum. So I think it's exactly for the reasons you heard. I mean, trying to break the silos, the need to walk between sectors. I mean, what Tari was saying also about, basically having a systematic, holistic approach. I mean, I think we say often, like, to save the forest, you have to go outside of the forest. So I think that's one of these pointers. And I think recognizing the challenges that are on both sides, or at least of these two communities that we are present here in the room. From the anti-corruption governance community, often having the feeling to be a bit alone, and have needed you working on environmental issues to speak to us, to tell us the stories, to ask for help, and us being able, hopefully, to share the tools, as Gabrielle was saying as well, as Joachim was pointing out. And so I think that's exactly the reason. And we know, as Simon was pointing, that it's not easy to look at corruption. It's kind of a beast from the distance, and sometimes from very near as well. And we are conscious it can be dangerous. We know some of our colleagues as well are receiving threats, and but often there is still a way, one way to another, to address that and to kind of contribute in a way or another to the fight against corruption. And I mean, Simon, you have to justify why you work on governance or corruption issues. I still have sometimes this question at Transparency International: why are you working on climate and environmental issues? So I have to explain, no, I'm fighting corruption, but also helping the fight against climate change and protecting the planet and the people who live there. So yeah, I think as Transparency International, we are proud to be a founding member together with WWF, with the Basel Institute for Governance and Traffic to launch that practitioners forum. We hope that many of you here in the room and outside of the room would also like to join us and help us sharing knowledge, sharing challenges, trying to find answers to that. And from TI, I can make the commitment that in the next years we will scale up our work, and we will hopefully be in a position to also support many of you and joining forces in that fight. So yeah, happy to hand over to Micol from the WWF to also complete that.
Super, thanks, Brice, and thank you all for joining us. I think, yeah, really to echo what has been said already, which is that, this is a really complex, it's not an issue, it's a set of issues, and the breadth of it is, I hope you've gathered and probably already know, is enormous. It encapsulates, everything from wildlife trade and deforestation to corruption and climate finance. There's a multitude of approaches that are needed, and I think what really comes out from, I'm quite new to the conservation space, but what really has struck me is just how that the ownership of this space has not been claimed, and it's a sort of systemic set of issues. And I think it's been said here today, but we need to all sort of get involved. So what we're asking for is really to create this community, a sort of network, and it's called we've sort of titled it the Countering Environmental Corruption Practitioners Forum. But this is early days, and we're really lucky to have partnership with colleagues from Basel, who will be talking about one of the working groups on follow the money techniques in this space later this week, from Traffic, from Transparency International. But we hope we've impressed upon you that we sort of need all of you as well. And we would really, really, really encourage you to join us and to co-create this together, to make it work, to help us scale, to help us deal with the just breadth of this problem, or set of problems, which we sort of don't have the benefit of time to deal with. And so sort of just to close with some next steps, and then it would be great to hear a bit from all of you. If I can make my little clicker here work. There we go. So there's a few ways to sort of next steps to get involved. First to say it is open to all. You can be from a government, from NGO, from donors. If you are interested and you have knowledge to give, join us. We will be having a side event over lunch on Thursday. Please come along. We don't know where, so to join that, or simply just to join if you can't come on Thursday, have a scan of this QR code here, which is hopefully you'll have there's some handouts around the room as well, and jot your email down so that we have you there. There are some other sessions as well that are focused on this topic, and we'd really encourage you to join those this week too. Find one of us, because we'd love to talk to you. But yeah, and just thank you so much for coming and for everyone for such a fascinating discussion.
Okay, finally, over to you. Yeah, so you have heard the comments from all of our speakers. I'm going to encourage that we talk a little bit and hear from you about the Practitioners Forum. You can always find these people. One of the great things about being the first session of the week is that there's an entire week to have these conversations. So find these people if you have questions about specific things that they talked about that you'd like to learn more about. But tell us what you think about the Practitioners Forum, how it can be useful to you. If you have questions about what it might look like, who can be involved, as Micol said, anyone can be. This will probably be mostly online, at least to start. It's been terrific to see people in person, but we know we can't do that, and let's think about the carbon footprint of doing that too often as well. But some questions for you. Sort of listening to the conversation today, where are the areas that you think are ripe for further discussion and work together as practitioners? There's a mic up here. I'd encourage you just to come up to the mic and offer your thoughts on this so that everyone in the room can hear you. I see we already have one person raising your hand. If you could go to the mic, that would be great. So think about where are areas that you think are ripe for further work and collaboration? What sorts of things would a practitioners forum be useful to do? We know there are networks focusing on advocacy and policy level issues related to the UNCAC. We know there are networks working on policy and advocacy related to nature-based crime or nature-related crime. In the anti-corruption space, what do we need to talk about? So please go ahead. I'll start with this gentleman since he was enthusiastically raising his hand, and then we'll go on from there. And please introduce yourself as well. So go ahead and just come. I would suggest you just come up to the mic, and that way we won't lose too much time in the transition.
All right, this is kind of in the center stage, but...
Is the mic in the center of the room available? It sounds like it, yeah.
It's working now? Hi, my name is Rachman. I work for the International Land Coalition on global policy and advocacy. Before that, I worked for TI for 13 and a half years. That's like a really long time. Here is the thing. So I think I just want to start this with a kind of a depressing note, because as I entered here, I got a message that one of our colleagues have been killed in Guatemala for standing for land and environmental rights. His name is Teresco. And he's fighting for land and environmental rights his whole life, and he was killed in front of his house yesterday. And he's leaving behind 4 kids. So one of the things that, as we talk about that, there's a kind of an elephant in the room, which is the role of the private sector, right? And in the whole sector of extractive industries and how it's ripping off our planet that we are living and the wildlife. So I felt that the connection in corruption is largely with the private sector is that money and politics in that sector, right? And so we didn't discuss so much on that. I don't know whether there are colleagues from Global Witness here today. And so every week, 4 land and environmental defenders have been killed. 4 of them have been killed every day. And we know the role of the oil and gas industry and the extractive industries in this context. So it's really encouraging to see practitioners forum. So to what extent that we really have to discuss about the role of the private sector. So one thing that we have to consider here is like the private sector is like putting some funding facilities and want to greenwash their work. And so in this context, how we really avoid that and to make sure that how do we legitimately look at some funding probabilities. And 2 things in addition to that. One last, very briefly, is that, so there are some regulations coming up at the EU level and then in some country level, including Germany in terms of doing businesses in other countries and human rights implications. So civil society who is here, to what extent they are capable of like monitoring that, right? And this practitioners forum would be useful. And finally, there's a conference happening on CBD, and there's going to be some mandatory requirements at national level coming up, including the land and environmental defenders. So how do you connect with that, particularly the civil society, in terms of how the practitioners can really work at the national level in terms of reporting on that? So those three messages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is, I think, a place where we'll be working really closely with some of the other networks that are working on policy, especially at the international level. We want to focus on the practice of doing anti-corruption and conservation work, I think is going to be where we spend most of our time, but we'll be probably doing some joint efforts with the UNCAC Coalition's working group on environmental crime and corruption, others, so that we really do try to make sure we're covering the territory and not duplicating it. But the points you've raised about environmental and human rights and land defenders is one that is worth all of us just taking a moment and recognizing how serious that is, and you know, what people are sacrificing in this effort. Short moment, thank you. Next.
Thanks.
Bob.
I was actually going to pick up on that topic a little bit,
Yeah.
but from a slightly different angle, which is, and first of all, thank you for the presenters. Very interesting information and great work, all of you. This forum was titled, oh, sorry, thank you. Tiernan Menon with Tetra Tech International. I do a lot of work on corruption, rule of law, land rights, community rights, and that's what I wanted to touch on and ask some feedback perhaps, or some reflection. Is the title of this forum, I believe, was From the Bottom Up, right? But I feel like a lot of the conversation was a little more top down. And so thinking about community environmental defenders, thinking about the bottom up, how can this practitioners forum help them? How can it help the environmental defender who was just killed in Guatemala? And so one thing that I think that we're also missing here is a connection between community efforts to fight corruption and conserve their land, and particularly looking at the connections between anti-corruption and community-based natural resource management. There's a lot of places around the world where indigenous groups, communities have increasingly devolved rights, and I think there's been some success, some examples, I think in Namibia, for example, where communities are actually more effective at fighting corruption and fighting trafficking than top-down state solutions. So I would encourage all of you to look at those connections further, see if community-based natural resources management, such as the Nepal community forestry, are actually better at fighting corruption or preventing corruption. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And yeah, it is just an example of the wide range of issues. And for the practitioners working on the ground, that you know, some of them are going to be working on national policy issues, some of them are going to be working in communities, and all of those are levels at which the awareness and the savvy about the impact of corruption is so needed. Over to Nils.
Yes, hi, my name is Nils Taxell. I'm with MSI, but more importantly, acting COP for USAID's Countering Transnational Corruption Grand Challenge for Development. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. This is a question, or rather a plug, perhaps masked as a question. But what I just wanted to mention is that with this Grand Challenge, one of the topics that we're seeking to address is illicit finance and trafficking in commodities. And that seems to me to be very much linked to what we've been discussing here. Not all environmental issues, of course, are transnational, but many of them are transnational in nature. And what we'll be looking for are innovative solutions and solvers to come up with new ideas, new ways of addressing these challenges with a specific focus on the transnational. And this will be done through grants that will be upwards of $500,000, or that's the maximum amount. And looking around this room, I think many of the solvers that we might be engaging with are here. In addition to that, this initiative will also be looking to engage with and support networks and practitioners. And again, this seems like a natural connection point. So I would hope to have more conversations and see how we can make that linkage happen. So thank you very much, and thank you for a great session.
Thanks for raising the opportunities that are also there to, you know, we all have to get support for this work that we do. I wanted just to pause after hearing 3 or so comments and questions, and we will come back to the others. If anyone would like to add any thoughts to what we were just talking about?
I mean, maybe just very briefly, I mean, we, on the issues of the communities and environmental defenders and so on, I think we recognize that, and I touched it briefly in my introduction as well, so it's definitely part of the forum, and I think we discussed as well how not to be too much top down and as much bottom up as possible. I mean, I think the panel shows a bit that, but I think we are also completely open to new ideas and also I think, as Micol was saying, this is just something that we are launching today that is work in progress, and we are here as well to hear your ideas and you know, in terms of the governance of it, so to speak. I think we're also open and we are discussing how we could maybe have indigenous peoples represented there, but for sure environmental defenders and whistleblower protection will be part of it, and the questions about the private sector and the questions about the impunity and yeah, seeing how we can address that. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Andrea Johnston. I work for KfW, the German Development Bank, so we do a lot of projects on behalf of the German government, financial cooperation. I've been working in conservation for more than 10 years, heading the climate and natural resources management team for Asia. And now I'm working on anti-corruption, heading the operative compliance for KfW. So I'm seeing the topic from both sides. And thank you very much again for the session. I think it was really interesting, but it only touched like the surface of the issues. So I'm very thankful for the offer of this practitioners forum. And before I forget, I would love to join it. However, my organization doesn't allow me to scan the code. So if there's any other way of leaving my email or something like this would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And as the colleague before already mentioned, and you have replied, I would have liked to focus on the same issue of involvement of communities, participation. I kind of missed, I mean, there was, you touched a little bit on it in different contributions here, but I think it really has to be focused on a lot more. So the topics of ownership, of benefits for the community, so basically stealing from the community. Corruption is stealing from the community because the benefits of corruption very seldom actually stay in the community itself. So I think the involvement of the community, co-management, community-based management and all this, I think this would really be something to focus on, and this is actually what we have the most positive effects with. So I don't want to repeat everything, but I would be thankful if the Practitioners Forum focused very much on this as well.
Thank you for that very concrete, like some others, very concrete points about what's important to focus on. That's really, really useful. I'm going to ask another colleague from WWF just briefly. Well, first I'm going to tell you, we will go to about 10 minutes past because that's about when we started. So we're getting close to wrapping up, but because we had to delay a little bit to get people in the room, we'll go a little bit longer. But there is an end in sight. So V works with our Mekong for the Future project at WWF in the greater Mekong region and had a comment especially on the community-based work.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'm the Chief of Party of the USAID Mekong for the Future, implemented by the WWF in Greater Mekong countries. So we operate in 5 of the Mekong countries: Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand. The project is an associate award of the Targeting Natural Resource Corruptions. It was co-created between USAID and the WWF that we would want to strengthen civil society participations and also active participations in natural resource governance through data and transparencies. The project has been implemented for about 2 years now, so we have been creating the network of the CSO that are interested on countering corruptions and also on protecting natural resources. And I think just because we have limited air time, so I didn't have the opportunity to speak, but as USAID and the WWF, we are also very much focused on the civil society and the communities, and we are doing the work on the ground, at least in the Greater Mekong countries. Thank you.
Thanks. And as I mentioned at the beginning, for those of you who weren't here, we have other colleagues from other WWF offices, including WWF Peru is represented here, and also our wildlife crime hub that is in Mexico. So if you're interested in those countries and the work that they're doing, come up afterwards for a minute, get introduced. Okay, our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Julia Farrington, and I'm co-curator of the Films for Transparency Festival that's running within this conference. Thank you very much for a really interesting panel, and I think another way of thinking about socializing and also introducing creative ways of thinking about these problems is to use documentary film, because it does tell those stories. And talking about that land defenders and communities, impacted communities, we've got two very, very good, brief plug here, very good films that I really would love to see you coming to, which is Delicado, which is about land defenders in the Philippines, and that's on Friday evening at 6, and Amazonia, a new Minamata, looks at mercury poisoning and its impact on communities living in the Amazon region, and that's on Thursday evening. But I think in a more general point is, for me also, it's a feeling of making those connections and the huge opportunity that this conference provides for telling those human stories, keeping them very much in the forefront of how you're thinking about these, and being able to draw in a public opinion as well, because that's something I don't think we've talked about. And I think that's a really important thing, and that documentaries can really assist with.
Thanks, Julia, and do check out that agenda. Okay, so we have... I promised you we'd leave at 10 past. We have 4 more minutes, so two speakers, and please, I think we'll call that a day. And please go ahead.
Okay, I'll look at my clock, make sure I don't go too far. I'm Sari Nelson. I'm the executive director at National Whistleblower Center. We were one of the winners of the last Grand Challenge, the Wildlife Crime Tech Challenge, and we did really innovative work in that program. You brought up whistleblowers quite a few times, thank goodness, in this conversation, and I think it would be great to have a wildlife and climate whistleblower practitioners subcommittee in the forum that's designated to practitioners, not only attorneys, but also environmental and wildlife defenders who want to inform us about how to best advance their rights and protections. National Whistleblower Center has been working with legislators and regulators in the United States, commenting on the Securities and Exchange Commission climate disclosure requirements, and also happy to announce that Congressman DeSolner recently introduced laws for oil and gas whistleblower protections, and we're looking to introduce some more wildlife whistleblower protections with the late Don Young's team. Another issue that I don't think came up enough during this conversation was how climate and wildlife violations are facilitated on online platforms, and how wildlife trafficking is widely proliferated on everyday platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. One study revealed that illegal wildlife products are available only 2 clicks away to any internet user. This is a major problem that the US has not taken any enforcement action around. And finally, as I brought up laws earlier, I think it's really important that we have a legislative and regulatory working group in this forum and make sure that we're able to talk about transnational laws and how we can harmonize across countries. Thank you so much for this great panel.
Great, and thank you for the suggestion about whistleblowers. We do have another great network, as I mentioned, that we're working with, who's doing some of the advocacy at the international level for international policy. So we'll be working closely with them. Okay, you have the dubious honor of being the last speaker here today.
Hi, my name is Gladys Kamasanyu. I came from Uganda. I head the Uganda Wildlife Court, which seems to be currently the only specialized wildlife court in Africa. I come out here to give a comment on especially what we can do that I've seen work in Uganda. The Wildlife Court, the only specialized wildlife court where you have experienced judicial officers on a day-to-day basis giving priority to these cases which were never ever prioritized before, and because of their nature and the challenge that we have today of corruption. I have seen it work that we have one courthouse, one courtroom where all these cases are coming, so you have all these other, so many individuals cut off, that you're dealing with specialized people and you know where to go, where you need anything. I've seen it promote coordination, cooperation, and communication among key players in the role, and it has worked for us. I don't know what all of us who are in here think about it, but having specialized courts to handle some of these cases, specialized agents, departments may be one of the solutions. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the work that you're doing in Uganda. I want to end by thanking all of you who came and who are still here. And again, there's kind of a cluster of conservation staff that are up in this front corner, and some other people who stood up as conservation activists in the room. So please let this be the beginning of a conversation. And if you can't scan, please come up and let us know if you're interested. And we will do our best to tell you about a location. Sorry? Oh, yes. You can also type in the link that's under the QR code up on the screen if you can't scan. Thanks again to all the people who made this possible. And I didn't mention Rachel Kramer and Anna Hidalgo from our team who were busy on comms the whole time. And to our staff in the back, thank you very much. Bye-bye.